Ladies and gentlemen, Business Unplugged is proud to welcome James Sommerville. Hi. Hi. I need water after that introduction as well myself.
Can I just say, this is called Unplugged, and I think it's a really great format, but I've never seen as many electrical things in one small space, including no, I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for having me here.
James, one of the things when I was asked to host Business Unplugged, I wanted to get beneath the skin and the psychology of the people who I'm interviewing today. And I said that to you last week as we sat in Starbucks having a coffee. And I want to thank you for your honesty and your integrity. Because James said to me, he said, Darren, I want people to go away with something real, something that they can take back to their business and their personal life. And that will mean me talking about the good times, but also talking about the bad times. So I want to thank you for that.
Okay.
Let's trace the journey to your success, first of all. Where were you born?
Huddersfield, the Royal Infirmary in Huddersfield.
What was your father's name?
My dad was called Martin.
Martin. And your mother's name?
Margaret.
And what was your father's occupation when you were born?
When I was born, I think he worked at Burton's, the tailors, and that's where he met my mum. And as we grew up, he changed his career several times.
Who was the biggest influence in your life as a child?
Well, I think certainly my dad was a huge influence. When I got to an age when I knew what my dad was doing for a living, so when I was 8, 9, 10, by that time he was a used car dealer. He was sort of like a classic, slightly, not shady, but slightly under the radar of everything that is, you know, seen as legal. You know, it's the 70s. He always seemed to have like everything was cash back then, buying and selling cars. And my dad was a bit of a schemer, a lovable rogue in many ways. He never did anything wrong, but he always had something going on, you know, and a big plan. It was almost like, this time next year, Rodney. That was my dad's sort of phrase before we heard it on TV.
Tell me about your first paying job, and what age were you when you did it?
My first paid job would have been, aside from maybe the usual paper rounds that you would do as a kid, I think at 15 or 16 I was the washer-upper at a restaurant in Murfield, the Three Nuns. That's where you know, after a year or so I was chief washer-upper, but I also learnt to peel onions there without crying. So that's one thing I do. You know, talk about picking things up from unexpectedly. I can now peel onions for the rest of my life without crying.
Tell me, people who are successful, they look back to one moment or a few moments in their childhood that kind of got them going. Steve Jobs, many of you may know, Steve Jobs always talks, you know, he always talked about when he was 12, he picked up the telephone and rang a guy called Bill Hewlett, who was a co-founder of Hewlett-Packard. He'd found his name in a phone book. And he said, "Can I have some spare parts, please?" And Bill said, "Yeah, sure, Steve, you can have them." And the lesson it taught Steve Jobs was, A, always ask, and B, whatever you do, always take action. So, what moment or moments in your childhood got you thinking?
Well, I think certainly we talked about my dad, and that was a huge inspiration. And you know, one of the things that he did during his years of looking for ideas on how to make money, basically, in '77 he'd heard about this craze that was coming from America, which was the skateboard. And my dad was a car salesman at the time, so he had the transportation, and he hired 3 trucks. He found a supplier in Germany. He drove to Germany and brought back 20,000 skateboards. Almost like one of the first to bring the skateboard, not literally the first, but certainly they weren't in every sports store, and started selling them out of the back of the van. In the transit of these skateboards, some of them broke, and you know, my dad wasn't bothered. There was like 200 out of 20,000 that he would have probably just thrown away, because he wasn't in the game of mending things. So I fixed them in the garage, and I put a sign in the local post office in where I lived in Huddersfield. These new skateboards for sale, £5, only 3 left. And I sold every one within a week. And so I'm like, you know, in 77 I'm like 10, 11. All of a sudden I've got £500 in £5 notes, and I just realised that, wow, you know, this is something that I'd managed to achieve, partly because my dad had given me the opportunity.
Yeah.
But also I think I saw that there was a need for it as well, or there was a gap or a desire that people wanted to get hold of these.
Yes.
So that was a real turning point for me.
Before we get into your business, can you answer this question? What is your greatest talent?
That's a difficult one, really, because, you know, you don't like to stand on a box and tell people what you're good at.
I'll go on, tell them.
I'll tell you what, I do think I'm good at actually seeing things, drawing the picture in my mind. I mean, that's the industry I'm in, and I can visualize things, whether it's a design. I've moved into directing, and so I can see the scene, or I can see the picture, or I can see the identity, the logo. So I think that's something that comes quite naturally to me, and I think the drawing of that picture in my head I enjoy, and then the process of bringing that to reality is what I do. That's my job.
Yeah. Let's look at the business. Now, this is one of the things I see many businesses get wrong. They set up and they say, I want as many customers as I can get, but they go after the wrong customers. When you set up Attik in 1986, you went after certain customers, but there came a moment where you just thought, no, this is not what we need to do. Will you please tell us about that moment and why you decided to go after certain customers?
Well, we were, in the early years, I guess work comes from anywhere and everywhere, as I'm sure we all appreciate. And so it was about survival, I think, for the first 5 years. And then we started to kind of think, well, we're working for some great clients, in a way. We were working for the electricity board, some engineering companies, I suppose almost like the backbone of Yorkshire industry in many ways. And from a design perspective, that really wasn't sort of floating our boat in many ways. It was quite conservative. Nobody really wanted to entertain or pay for good design. I think it was like, you know, there was always that feeling that you're having to twist somebody's arm in a boardroom to pay for design, where they really just wanted a brochure and a quick logo, and it's way before websites. So yeah, that was a real challenge, and I think we woke up one day and said, you know, why are we doing this? We're doing this just to design reporting accounts for engineering companies, which were quite great, lucrative projects, but it really wasn't where our heart was. So we got on a train and in our car, and we drove down to London. And by which time I think we were like 22, 23. We were interested in, you know, we were young guys, you know, girls going out, partying, clubs, music. And it was also the development of the gaming industry. Had just started to sort of pick up some momentum. So we banged on the door of Sega Games in London, MTV, and wanted to do a PlayStation. And we thought we may as well try and approach people that actually things and subjects that fit into our life and things that we enjoy. And I think that was a real turning point and changed the direction and the course of our agency at that point, where we stopped doing what we didn't want to do and started to do what we wanted to do.
I think one of the big questions for anybody in your field is, how do you persuade somebody to spend money on a design or a feeling? Many leaders in business are criticized because they may come from a chemical, an engineering, an accountancy, or a legal background, and they're accused of not really understanding their customer because they don't spend much time in the front line. They're busier up above with strategy. So how do you persuade a big organization to spend the money that they need to?
Well, I think in the design field that I focused on, although design was a challenge to sell to clients in the early years, I think if you look across, just go down the high street, design is, for those great brands that we all recognize and buy into, I think the one thing that they have in common, even though they're different from different sectors, they value design and design thinking. And I think that sort of creativity within those brands, partly why we engage with them on an everyday level. And so, because you could say, well, Apple, you mentioned Steve Jobs. Are they any different to Dell? They make computers. Those computers do exactly the same things. But I wouldn't be seen dead with a Dell. And I'm sure there's a lot of people in here that might not want to buy, a tablet from a Dell. It's almost like you don't. So design and the ethos of that brand actually does carry forward, and actually ultimately is part of their sales strategy.
Well, you're talking about Dell, you're talking about Apple. Why are you so passionate about Apple over Dell? Why would you not be seen dead with a Dell?
Well, I think we were early adopters on Apple. Simon and I, we decided to make an investment in around about 86. We'd heard of Apple, but we'd never seen one. We had to go to Bradford to one Apple dealership, almost like the first in Yorkshire. We went there, we saw this thing on screen, it was all pictures, it was all icons, albeit black and white. And for us, it was like another turning point. And we did some type messing about, and we said, we'd like to print it out. And the guy said, we can't print it in Yorkshire, we have to send the floppy disk to London. So that's a kind of that's how almost how difficult or how brand new Apple was.
Yes.
There wasn't even a printer in Yorkshire. But we were just so sort of taken back by it that we just thought, this is it. And since then we've always been Apple, not just recently when all the consumer goods have come out.
Yeah. And many people, I'm sure there are many people here in the audience today who treat their mobile phone like a secret lover, and it does cause problems in some relationships. I see many smiling faces now, where one partner will say, I wish you would switch that mobile phone off. Tell me about the time you defied your wife's order, where you checked your BlackBerry.
Yeah, it was before the iPhone now. It's like maybe 2006, I was on holiday, and we were going down to the beach, and Christine said, look, leave the phone in the hotel room. And I said, yeah, of course. And for some reason, it fell into my bag. And it was a BlackBerry then, or, Crackberry, as we probably all think of it. And there is that slight, they were new, and staying in touch seemed relatively quite new then. This is only 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah. But it was like, wow, I can actually keep in touch from the beach. And actually I wasn't on the phone, but it did beep. And that was an incoming email from a guy I'd never heard of, from somebody who had obviously picked up our name or come across one of our books, and he was one of the design directors at Coca-Cola in Atlanta. So he just hit me with an email and said, hey, we are about to finish Germany World Cup. Coca-Cola needs a new global point of view, a new identity in our football category, because we've been sponsoring the World Cup for about 80 years, and we think it's time now, after Germany, after the final whistle has gone that summer, we need a new identity. You guys have got a reputation, and you're based in the UK, so you're in the kind of motherland of football, etc., etc. Would you be interested in pitching? So from that, slight kind of breaking of the BlackBerry rule, that incoming email came, which was out of the blue, which again was another kind of thing that changed the course of our company's career then.
One mistake which many companies make when they meet someone like yourself, they'll say, well, we need this message in, and we need that message in, and finance want that message in, and sales want that message in, and it becomes cluttered. You've brought a can of Coke and an old picture of the old Coke before you took over the branding.
Right.
Can we show the audience, and can you explain the difference in the design and your thought process?
Well, yeah, Darren asked me to bring a can of Coke, which we've all seen, and it's out there in Tesco's today, but also the can that we were given, and we were asked to be part of the redesign. So this was in 2006, after the football project. So that went really well, they were very happy, and they said, right, we've got something else for you, we'd like you to look at the brand. So it's like, ooh, that's quite a big project. So the can that was in the market then, and I couldn't find one. I tried to get one on eBay and everything, so it's only 5 years old, so it feels like it's a collector's copy anyway, but I printed one out. You will recognise it, because that was around for a long time, you know, and it's only in the last few years that that's disappeared completely now. It appears from the face of the earth. But what you'll see on there is where Coke were and their identity, and I think where many identities seem to fail. That can there is exactly the same can as today, but it's absolutely cluttered with bubbles, drop shadows. It's almost kind of got desktop publishing overload. It's gone through that Photoshop era, and that's what came out of the other end. So it was that we decided to address. Not redesign the can. Nobody's going to ever redesign the can of Coke. But essentially, that's what it looks like. That's what we did. So sometimes design is not what you do. It's what you can take away, not what you add. So structurally, it's exactly the same. We led Coke to believe that, you know, there's an idea around owning red, the power of red. No other brand on the planet should really be owning it. Not Virgin, not T-Mobile, or any other brand that feel like they've got the authority to use red. So by simplifying everything, that was something that we did. And I think that's also, for us, an analogy for businesses. Because I think it's almost like shedding things that you do not need. You do not need all that clutter. And I think we approached at the time, we were going through some difficult times before that, and we were approaching in the previous recession our business model like that as well, is almost like applying this same design philosophy to the way that we run our business essentially. So that was quite a transition. But I think in terms of the messages everywhere, Coke would never say on a billboard, we have this really fizzy drink that's made of 95% water and sugar and sold in 10 million outlets in the world, and it's 60p a can. They will never ever tell us that. That's not what the billboard is there to do, for instance. I think the billboard is there for us to look, and Coke's message would be, we want to make the world a happier place. So that billboard is about us engaging with something that feels quite positive and happy, and it's a drive-by. So we're not looking for the price, and I think where a lot of companies fail is they try to get everything on their billboard. Now, billboard's a metaphor. It could be your van, your fleet, your livery. It could be your online presence. It could be your A-board outside your newsagents. It's whatever your own billboard is. And I think sometimes there's a desire to get everything in there unless people miss it. But I think there's a process of, we talked to Coke about the journey from out of home where you love Coke to in the shop where you want a Coke. And that's where they flip the message. And you, as consumers, you won't realise this, but it's all about getting the taste buds going as you get closer to the fridge. So you choose Coke over Pepsi or Dr. Pepper's or R. White's lemonade. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with those drinks. They all do the same thing. But at some point, that decision has to come as to what you will choose, but it's not outside on the billboard. And so I think, you know, understanding that journey is really important, not try and cram everything into every space.
Is the problem that people have small budgets and they think, I want this to stretch as far as possible? Yeah. What would you suggest to somebody in business? Because one of the problems we see in business, many get it right, many don't get it right as well, where they send out too many conflicting messages. They haven't got one message right. I think Jack Welch, one of the world's most famous CEOs, once said, people are obsessed with LinkedIn and Twitter and Facebook, and he said, they're so important, but the message has got to be right. If you're sending out loads of messages just to blanket all these social media sites, you're making a big mistake. What advice would you give to people trying to market themselves, trying to brand themselves on social media websites?
Well, I think undoubtedly it's taken over the world, and we all know how important they are, not just on a social, you know, staying in touch with friends and seeing where your old schoolmates have gone. I think that era has passed. It's now a commercial tool. It will drive economies and things like that. So, but I think it's a case of understanding which social platforms are the right platforms for the business. and then how to use them, and how to carve up the messages across those platforms. I almost think like being on Twitter for a business and being on Facebook for a business, it's a full-time job, you know. The director of social media, if it doesn't exist in a boardroom, it should do. Because I think, yeah, they've got marketing directors and finance and all those other really important functions running any business. But I think the social side of it, and it could be a spin-off of marketing, but in many ways, it's more about a conversation. So I think anybody can launch a Facebook and a Twitter site, but if those sites are not maintained and the dialogue is not relevant to the audience, then it's almost, you will just like create something, then it'll die, and then you'll have a splutter again, and you'll have spikes of conversations, and I think that will probably be almost a waste of time.
Well, let me give you an example. I was speaking to someone in business last week, and they said, I've got over 5,000 followers on Twitter. And I asked the question, how many of their messages do you read? And the person said none. And I said, right, well, do you think they read yours? Or is this just all one big feel-good thing where, hey, I've got 5,000 people following me, I feel great? You talked about engaging with people, so there's a real conversation.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of a real conversation that helps build business?
Well, I think real conversations are like the events here today and tomorrow.
Yeah.
I don't think you could, get away from people to people, and obviously that's not always possible.
Yeah.
And in a national sales network or even a global market, it's virtually impossible. But I think at some point it is about communicating the personality of the organisation.
Yeah.
You talk about, I see a lot of young designers. They send me their portfolio. It's got great work on it. I can see their work. Some of them are just out of college or university. Some of them are 5-10 years into their career. The work looks great. They've shown me what they've done. It's in print. It's in motion graphics and internet. It's great. They don't tell me anything about themselves. Maybe there's a CV thrown in with the PDF portfolio. And I think one of the tricks that we've learned is that you communicate why you're doing what you're doing as opposed to what you're doing. I think it's really important for us to be able to engage with that why, because we can relate to it as consumers, or if we want to do business to business or business to consumer, or I'm hiring a young designer or vice versa. If I can relate to why that person is doing what they are doing, or why that brand is doing what they're doing, I might not be able to see them physically, but I feel like I'm actually closer to them and aligned with their way of thinking. And then I'll understand, yeah, well, they're a great designer and they can do print and they can do internet design, so that's great. Well, I would expect that anyway. But I think the first thing is to engage on a more human level.
You spoke about Apple, you're a big fan. I was watching a documentary on Steve Jobs, and Stephen Fry was asked the question, is Apple just style over substance? And Fry, quick as a flash, said, no, you're missing the point. Style is as important as substance. If you have a lovely design, you'll want to spend more time with it. You'll get more use out of it. Here's the question for people who maybe are not into marketing as much as you. Is marketing more important than the mastery?
I think marketing is crucial, really, in terms of everything that we do, and also, through all generations there's been marketing. I know in terms of today's buzzwords and social media and things like that, but I generally do feel that without marketing, you could have the best product, the best people, but if the voice is not there, it's purely a voice. It's how you portray and project that voice, really. And I think you could get bad marketing. Like I say, you could communicate in a very analytical, unemotional way, and most of us are turned off by that. I see car ads and, the new Volkswagen this, that, 9,999, does 53 to the gallon, blah, blah, blah. It really does not turn me on at all. It might do some people because it's price driven, but I think, we're all slightly different. We all look at different things. The next poster down the line, or I open the newspaper, and it's an amazing photograph of somebody with the windows down, and it's a beautiful day, and they're going through the countryside. That might actually be more akin to what I'm looking for.
Yeah.
And the price is very small at the bottom, and the miles per gallon is not even mentioned. So one size does not fit all, and I think you have to find out what are people looking for in terms of, I believe, what you have as a business. So I think ultimately, though, marketing is definitely part of the mix. Without it, it's impossible.
Well, I suppose you ask somebody driving an expensive car why they bought that car, and they might tell you about the horsepower, braking, whatever, all the extras. But then you suddenly realize that they bought an emotion, but they're justifying with logic.
Right.
Which is what most of us do, isn't it,
yeah.
really?
Yeah. I think the emotional side will definitely, the biological part of our brain that tells us, oh, I like that. I'm not sure why, but I definitely like it. And then eventually we will rationally persuade ourselves why it's the right thing to do. If it's an expensive car or if it's just a treat. It's a bar of chocolate. It doesn't really matter what that may be. But it's certainly that part of the brain that engages first.
Yeah.
And then we kind of break down and justify it to ourselves why we're going to go for it.
Before we get deeply personal, let's talk about Attik. What's the future for Attik now that you're part of the Dentsu Incorporation?
Well, I think Attik has got, within the Dentsu family and with Dentsu at the reins, Dentsu are 100 years old. They've spent most of that 100 years in Japan. They are looking for global growth. They haven't got another 100 years to double the size of Dentsu, and they're a colossal, $16 billion revenue advertising agency. So they are a monster, but they are looking for small shops and brands around the world that will accelerate their global growth, because they now see that the rest of the world is as important, if not more important, than Japan itself. So from Dentsu's point of view, they targeted several companies, of which Attik were one, and they can build on that 20-25 year name in the industry, and they're not, because we weren't that many people. We were like 60 people, but Dentsu employ 17,000 people in Tokyo alone. They don't need another 60 people on their kind of paycheck list. What they need is they needed a brand or an identity that could enable them to kind of speed up their growth. And I think in their hands now, Attik is in great hands. They're a great organisation, and I think they will be able to take it, to the next platform. As an independent, we would have never been able to do that.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to see what they do with Attik over the next 25 years, really.
Let's get a bit personal with your business. What type of a leader would you consider yourself? In 3 words, how would you describe yourself?
That's a tricky one, really, because I would say that I'm pretty fair. I like to put myself in the other person's shoes, and I'm not one for saying it's my way or the highway. I think when I was younger, I was probably a bit more like that, and I think you're a bit more kind of, you're out to prove yourself when you're young, naturally, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think as you grow older, it's definitely more respectful of the other person's opinion. Mm-hmm. But I do look for that spark as well. Yeah. And I think it's without that spark, it's there's just so many people that don't really inspire. Mm-hmm. But once you come across somebody who inspires you, yeah, I think that's and I would like to think that I could deliver on that as well. Yeah. But in my own way, because I respond to that when I see it.
Yeah. We've all had those moments where we've said something, done something, it's wrong, and we think, oh, I wish that never happened. Can you take us back to one of those moments where you just made a big mistake?
Well, I mean, that's like, where do we start? I think we could talk for an hour on that. I think some real clangers for us. We've hired certain people in a advisory, non-executive capacity that we thought might actually be able to get us to the next level, and in many ways, in a short space of time, they managed to almost poison our business. So I think those big lessons really, in terms of people coming into the family, as you might call it, who promise that I can do this and I will be able to, and I've got grey hair and I'll be able to, I'll definitely be able to get you into that, and one day we'll sell, and it's all of a sudden 2 months into it, the guy's just turning up for his check, and they're not really part of you. They're really just looking to hook on and get a consultancy fee, which is fine. But as a young business, where every penny counts, as a small business, irrespective of whether you're young or old, that type of person is potentially dangerous.
Yes.
And I think we've burnt our fingers a couple of times doing that. Having said that, it never put us off. And I think when you eventually land on somebody or a group of people who can advise you in the right way, it's really fulfilling.
Yeah. One of the things, I've interviewed many people in business and showbiz, and one of the things I'm always fascinated is they have this core belief to never stop learning. And I think the phrase is, if you want job security today, make sure you learn something new every single day. Apart from your emails, what do you read and what do you study throughout the day?
That's a tricky one as well, because I don't read. I don't think I've ever read a book. I've started about 100. I get to page 7 and fall asleep. I don't know if that's just me, but I do kind of read press. I do like to, if I'm travelling on the train, if I've got some downtime, I will definitely like to read a newspaper. Mm-hmm. I like reading things that are current. I do. I don't know why. I think I'm interested in. I probably wasn't interested in at school. All the things I didn't like at school, I like now.
Yeah.
Like trying to speak French. Hated it at school. Didn't like history. Love it now. And I think things like that, and just economics and the world, and I think newspapers can deliver that.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily mean on tablet form or Twitter or sound bites from wherever. I actually mean a real newspaper is quite nice. There's nothing. If I travel and I'm traveling alone, it's great to have a newspaper on a train or on a plane. Yeah. It's a bit old school, but I quite like that.
Yeah. With regards to, let me give you an example. We spoke about this last week, and we didn't go into it, but that's almost like a Harvard Business School case study. 2 people on your team are sending emails back and forth. There's a big dispute going on. They're CCing you in on it. What do you do when this goes on and on, when it escalates, and you think, hold on, all they had to do was pick up the phone and have a chat and sort it out, or come to me? What do you do when you see these sorts of disputes going on?
Well, if it's going on and going on, I think it's time to get everybody in a room and just, thrash it out. But I would generally encourage them to, for me personally, my style would be to let them sort the problem out. I'm gone are the days where I try and wade in and try and sort the problem out for them. We've all been probably in those situations as well, and I prefer to step back, allow it to kind of unravel, and see whether the problem can get sorted out between whoever that may be. Not that happens a lot. I can't remember the last time that may have happened, but I know where you're coming from with that question, and I think it's for me, as I've mentioned earlier, it's as I've matured in my career, I'm less likely to dive in and try and be the saviour, of something, or problem solver. It's like, you guys deal with it, and then and if really it couldn't, and I don't think I've ever been in this situation, but just let's all go to Starbucks and sort it out.
How do you motivate people?
Well, in the past we had at one point we had a studio in San Francisco and Sydney and London and LA, and it was they're all young designers, and they're all hungry to do great work, and so we came up with an idea in about 95 of publishing our own design books. And that was just a way of trying to stitch everybody together under one common project, because we all had different clients, and some projects were great in New York, but they're working on something not quite as great in London, and there's always this, we'd love to do what they're doing. So we invented this brief where we would publish the book and print the book, but we want you guys to create. So let's say out of all the studios we have maybe like 30 or 35 designers. We want you to create the design and the content, but out of working hours. So this is not, we can't afford to pay you to come to work to design a book. We want you to stay behind, and we want you to come in on a weekend, and we want to see how passionate you are at design. And I think that sorted out, what you might say, the real designers from those that maybe were just kind of floating in and floating on. And that became one of our big success stories, not only because our designers, and not just the designers, the people who helped publish it, market it, sell it, it involved everybody in the organisation.
Yes.
And it's something that we all took ownership of. Simon and I knew that we were creating a marketing tool, but we pitched it as a great opportunity for us to let our hair down and design something where there's no client brief.
Yeah.
And so, wow, that was like a red rag to a bull from a designer's point of view. And we just happened to sell those books around the world, and that's the book that Coca-Cola would have bought, and that's the reason that call came in.
Brilliant.
So there was method in that madness as well.
Tell me, when have you had to let someone go from your organisation, and how did you deal with that?
I mean, it's always a very difficult meeting, and I'm sure other people in the room can relate to it, irrespective of which side of the table you're on.
Could you not just brand it up in such a way where they actually feel good leaving the room? And
yeah, I do. I mean, I just say that nobody has ever left our organisation and has not had a job within a couple of weeks. I mean, this is slightly big-headed, but if you've worked at Attik and then you go on somewhere else, the chances are maybe one of the other agencies would be at least interested in giving you an interview. Yeah. Then it's up to you, But I think I would, my closing, when we've downsized, and we have several times, is that, hopefully what you've learned here with us should stand you in good stead for opening another door. Yeah. So rather than looking at the fact that it's a black day, it's a disastrous moment, see it as an opportunity to take what you've learned. We've still got a great relationship, and then try and kind of catapult upwards. Yeah. Instead of just, you can get stuck in a rut in the same organisation anyway. Yes. So it's always a case of trying to highlight the positives.
Let's go more personal now. When you read articles on many successful people, and they'll talk about the greatness they've achieved and this and that, and then you'll read halfway down the page they've been divorced 9 times. And I'm always interested in people who are successful in business, how they lead a balanced life, what's important to them. And I think one of the mistakes which I see is when people set up a business, they have to micromanage everything at the start, but then they find it hard to actually let go of the reins and trust people to do the job. Did you have an issue with that? You'd worked so hard, you set it up in 1986. What was your mindset with regards to letting people grow and let them make mistakes?
I had no problem whatsoever in letting go of, in the early stages of any business, you're doing everything. Finance, accounting, HR, new business. But really, the reason you started the business was for none of those things, really, if I'm being honest. I was a designer, but 75% of my day was doing non-design things. So I had absolutely no issue in letting go of some of those responsibilities, which freed up time for me to do what I feel I was born to do. So I took great pleasure, and rather than micromanaging all those aspects of running a business, also at the same time allows other people to flourish and develop their careers as well and develop their own skill sets.
What is your greatest achievement in life?
Definitely my family, my wife Christine, my children, my 4 kids. Slightly cliched, I know, but I guess we're all human. We all do different jobs, but we all do it for the same reasons, I suspect. And I would say that's my greatest achievement.
Christine, of course, is here today. Good answer.
Yeah.
You're safe?
Did I get that right?
I want to ask you, what's your favourite word?
I would say can.
Can? Is that because of I can do or can of Coke?
Both, I guess. No, I think it's definitely I'm rather than cannot. I think there's always a way to solve a problem. If we think carefully and we sketch it out and talk about it. Maybe the word maybe is in front of it, but maybe we can. But rather than just ruling things off straight away, I definitely would say I'm more of a can than a cannot.
Okay. What's your least favourite word?
I think, I could say the opposite, but I think one word that I don't like is bully. I don't like it because it's just not a nice word sounding, but I also don't like the reason and the meaning of it as well. I had a little bit of that at school when I was young. I was knocked about a bit and it stuck in my mind. And then in business, you can see it. I've seen it from clients who treat agencies in a disrespectful way. I've seen it within organisations and people who come in and talk to others. So whether it's in the playground or whether it's in the grown-up world, I think it's a really bad thing and a terrible word. And I just think the word and the spelling of the word and the way it sounds just sort of like, I don't like it.
If heaven is real and you are lucky enough to get a place there, who would be the first person you'd like to see?
Probably the creative director. You might know him as God. But that or my dad.
Yeah.
And say thanks for, you probably didn't realise you were giving me advice, but you certainly did.
Yeah.
So I'd probably, and my grandma, who, effectively said, yeah, go on, paint the attic, and you can have that studio rent free. So she was called Rose Wood. So I'd like to, the real things in life, the family who are no longer with us, I think would probably be the people I'd like to bump into.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, Business Unplugged is grateful for the wisdom and honesty of James Sommerville.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have a roving mic? No. Okay, well, a few people have just asked a few questions.
Okay.
If you don't mind me reading them out.
Okay.
This is from John. Is John here? John? Hi, John. In the B2C sector, as business gets tougher, many businesses across many sectors are involved in deep discounting of their products in order to gain sales and market share at any cost. Do you have a view on the impact this may have on the perception of the brand of these businesses, i.e., does discounting devalue the brand?
Well, I would say if the brand was always a discount brand, then clearly no. So if it's a price-driven product or service, then discounting obviously is the kind of backbone and the proposition. If it's been a high-value brand, and all of a sudden, because of the economic climate, we decide to slash the price, I think that's really dangerous. I think we come across this. We're not a cheap agency, and our client says, well, but we've only got this, and our proposal might be that. So we would very rarely slash our price. We just don't give as much, So there's other ways of, I guess, presenting the price to the end user in a more economic way, but you just maybe not giving as much within it, rather than just cheapening it.
So what would £2,000 get me with you, James?
You've just spent it.
I've just spent it. Danny Phillips. Is Danny here? Hi, Danny. Danny's question. I remember last year when you mentioned that as a company you were going through a rough patch and a potential pitch for the Camel brand, and the Camel brand kind of saved you guys at the time. I would like to know how you deal with pitch work and whether it is something you charge your clients for or not. Also, do you think unpaid pitch work is something that is undermining the industry? Good question.
Yeah, Danny, definitely. I wouldn't. We are very anti-pitch, unpaid pitch. I think pitching is good. It's healthy. It's competitive. You can benchmark yourself against others, and I also think, like anything else, it's equally good sometimes to lose as well as win. because by losing you can improve and understand why, and you know, we cannot win everything. I think if agencies are exploited and asked to pitch for free, my approach would be to question the ethics of that organisation and whether that's the organisation that you would want to work for. If the organisation is honourable, professional, and is actually going into this relationship seriously, even if they're only covering, you know, metaphorically your bus fare, there needs to be a gesture on their part. You know, a grand, couple of grand, 5 grand, however big the pitch is. You will undoubtedly then put 5, 10 times more than that in your time. But without that gesture, I just don't think you get the best out of an agency.
Well, it's easy, of course, for someone to call you in, get your ideas, you go away, you work on this proposal, and all they've done is spent half an hour, or even 2 hours of their time with you. So I see exactly where you're coming from. Yeah,
I mean, those sort of situations are, they're sharks, and you don't want to be working with them anyway. So it's probably a blessing in disguise if the contract doesn't come off.
Yeah. Sharon Senior, is Sharon here? Hi, Sharon. This is your question. When young and just starting out with your grant, did you have a strategic networking policy?
We just when we first started out, we were really just knocking on the shop front doors of the shops in Huddersfield town centre, because that's where kind of our home base was, and so that was our networking strategy. I mean, obviously, I've talked about going and being young and going out and, you know, your friends. So you would almost tap into it's social networking before social networking. You tap into those that are close to you and find out. And because we're 19, 20, it's like, oh, your dad's got a business. Does he need a brochure? You know, so you're almost using your friends as a way to try and get to somebody who might be a decision maker that could give you a job. But, you know, it's all about maybe speaking to those, you know, within your kind of like inner circle in many ways.
So really, as much as social media has grown, things in many ways haven't changed, because when you're speaking to big decision makers, you want to look into the whites of their eyes and the same coming back to you. So selling, persuasion, face-to-face, how crucial do you see that in the overall business?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed at all. It's just the channels have changed, and it's faster, and we maybe get a response much quicker, and we can respond quicker. But I think essentially the methodology has probably been around since the pharaohs of, you know, I've got this, you want it, hopefully you want it. How can I sell that to you? What will I get in return? And how are we going to be able to communicate in order for us to do that trade or that business, or, you know? So I think the methodology is exactly the same as it's always been.
Yeah. One final question. I think this is from you as well, Sharon. Given the changing economic front and corporate shifts, what advice would you give to an SME when the days don't score well on the Fab Day Today test? Does that make sense?
I think so. If it's about, you know, when you know, is it like Sharon? Do you mean it's like when you have a bad day? Yeah. Okay. Well, I think like you've got to see the bad days. It's about losing. You know, I'm sure sport's always a great analogy, and I've already mentioned about it's good to lose, because then you really enjoy the win. It's the same in a good day and a bad day, I think. I think the bad days, if there's too many bad days, then maybe obviously you've got to question whether it's the right thing that you're doing. But I think the bad days definitely make the good days more enjoyable. And I think what we can learn from those bad days actually, you know, result in us turning it around and moving forward to a good day. So I think it's like the recession. It's hard, it's tough, it's difficult, nobody likes it, but we will all benefit from it in some way, I think. You know, we'll sharpen our business, we'll improve our marketing, our strategy, we'll clean up our team, we'll clean up our can of Coke, which is the metaphor. I just think all those things are really important, otherwise we become lazy, we become fat, we become complacent, And I think if you're just having good day, good day, good day, unless you're like one, you know, the 1% who seem to have those good days, I think you don't learn anything. So I think the bad days should be taken as an opportunity to learn something. If it's bad all the time, though, I'd move on.
That's all our questions. Ladies and gentlemen, James Sommerville.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Okay, cheers. Thanks.